You really thought you could walk in here looking like that? The words landed harder than the music echoing beneath the crystal chandeliers. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to pause. Conversation slowed. Glasses hovered in midair. Heads turned. At the center of the attention stood Nia Whitmore, calm, composed, dressed in a simple navy evening gown that carried no flashy designer logos and demanded no attention. She had arrived alone at the Kensington Foundation Gala in Manhattan, one of the most exclusive charity events of the year, where billionaires, politicians, and Fortune 500 executives gathered beneath gold-trimmed ceilings and sparkling lights. Nia had expected arrogance. She had expected judgment. What she had not expected was Evelyn Kensington. The billionaire's sister stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. A glass of red wine rested loosely in her hand as a smile curled across her face. "Security really needs to do a better job screening guests," Evelyn said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. A few nervous laughs followed. Others looked away. Nia met Evelyn's eyes without saying a word. Silence settled between them like a challenge. Evelyn mistook it for weakness. "Let me guess," she continued. "You're somebody's plus one who wandered too far from the cocktail area." More laughter. Sharper this time. The room felt smaller, tighter, charged. Nia remained still. She had spent decades learning that some people revealed themselves best when left uninterrupted. Then it happened. With a careless flick of her wrist, Evelyn tilted the glass. Red wine splashed across the front of Nia's gown, staining the fabric in dark streaks. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One woman lowered her champagne flute. A man near the stage muttered, "Did she really just do that?" The orchestra continued playing, but the music suddenly sounded distant. Every eye in the ballroom locked onto the scene unfolding beside the grand staircase. Evelyn laughed softly and took a step back. "Oops," she said. The word dripped with intention. Cameras remained lowered. No one wanted to be the first to react. The air felt frozen. Nia glanced down at the wine for only a second. Then she looked back up. Her expression never changed. Not anger, not embarrassment, not even surprise. Just calm. The kind of calm that unsettles people. Evelyn's smile faltered for the first time. "Well," she asked, "aren't you going to say something?" Nia folded her hands lightly in front of her. Around them, whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire. People sensed they were witnessing something important, though they didn't yet understand why. Across the room, several executives exchanged uncertain looks. Near the auction stage, a young woman stopped recording a conversation and focused entirely on Nia. The tension grew heavier with every passing second. Then Nia finally spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the room with effortless precision. "You may want to remember this moment." Evelyn blinked. A few guests exchanged confused glances. The words sounded simple, but something about them carried weight. Something final. Something dangerous. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared in Evelyn Kensington's eyes. And somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, events had already begun moving that would turn a single glass of wine into the most expensive mistake her family had ever made. Nobody moved after Nia Whitmore spoke. The ballroom remained suspended in a strange silence, as if the entire evening had forgotten how to breathe. Evelyn Kensington still stood there holding the empty wine glass, waiting for outrage, waiting for embarrassment, waiting for some visible reaction she could celebrate. Instead, she got nothing. Nia simply turned and walked toward a nearby hallway lined with framed photographs from past charity galas. Her heels moved across the marble floor with steady confidence. Behind her, whispers multiplied. Some guests assumed she was leaving. Others sensed something entirely different. What none of them understood was that Nia Whitmore had spent most of her life walking through rooms where people underestimated her. 22 years earlier, she had stood outside another Manhattan gala wearing a borrowed black dress and carrying a business proposal she hoped would change her future. A security guard had looked her up and down before asking whether she was part of the catering staff. She still remembered the sting of that moment. Not because it hurt her pride, but because of how familiar it felt. Years later, after building a technology consulting firm from a two-person startup into a multinational powerhouse, she discovered something important. Success changed her bank account. It changed her address. It changed the people who wanted to know her. But it did not always change the assumptions strangers made when they first saw her. That lesson had followed her into boardrooms, private clubs, luxury resorts, and charity events just like this one. Nia reached a quiet corner near the gallery entrance and accepted a linen napkin from a concerned staff member. "Thank you," she said warmly. The young employee nodded and quickly stepped away. Nia carefully dabbed the wine from her gown. There was no rush in her movements. No frustration. No panic. She treated the stain like a minor inconvenience. Across the ballroom, Evelyn had already begun entertaining a growing circle of guests. "Honestly," she said with a laugh, "some people will do anything to get attention." Several people smiled politely. Others looked uncomfortable. One older executive slowly shook his head and returned to his table. The atmosphere was changing, even if Evelyn could not feel it yet. Near the stage, Sarah Mitchell watched everything. Sarah worked for a private equity firm and had attended enough high-profile events to recognize confidence when she saw it. There was something unusual about the woman Evelyn had targeted. Most people would have left. Most people would have argued. Nia had done neither. That bothered Sarah in a way she could not explain. Nearby, a young corporate attorney named Jason Cooper studied Nia from across the room. The face seemed familiar. He knew he had seen her somewhere before. Not at a gala. Not in a social magazine. Somewhere bigger. Somewhere important. He searched his memory while conversations resumed around him. Meanwhile, Nia looked through a nearby glass wall overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city lights stretched for miles beneath the night sky. Her reflection stared back at her. Calm. Focused. Unshaken. The gala continued behind her, unaware that the woman standing alone by the window held information capable of changing the future of everyone in that ballroom. And while guests returned to their conversations, and Evelyn enjoyed the attention she believed she had earned, the first pieces of a much larger story were already beginning to move into place. Evelyn Kensington had always been the kind of person who believed a room belonged to her the moment she entered it. 20 minutes after the incident, she was still moving from table to table collecting laughter, compliments, and attention. The story had already become her favorite topic of the evening. "You should have seen her face," Evelyn said with a grin as several guests gathered around. "I honestly thought she was going to cry." A few people forced polite smiles. Others glanced toward the far side of the ballroom, where Nia Whitmore remained near the windows overlooking Manhattan. The distance between the two women was only about 50 feet, yet it felt much larger. Evelyn continued performing for her audience. Every retelling grew more dramatic than the last. Every version painted her as the victim of an awkward misunderstanding rather than the cause of it. "Some people spend their entire lives trying to get into rooms they do not belong in," she said. "Eventually somebody has to say something." This time the laughter was weaker. The energy had shifted. Guests who had witnessed the moment firsthand remembered exactly what happened. Across the ballroom, Sarah Mitchell watched the reactions carefully. The more Evelyn talked, the more uncomfortable people became. Wealthy donors exchanged glances. Senior executives returned their attention to their drinks. Several guests quietly excused themselves from the conversation altogether. It was the first sign that Evelyn was losing control of the narrative. She simply did not know it yet. Jason Cooper continued searching his memory. Something about Nia refused to leave his mind. He pulled out his phone and opened a recent business publication. A photograph appeared. On the screen, Jason froze. Then he looked up toward Nia. Back to the photograph. Then back again. His heartbeat quickened. "No way," he whispered. The realization hit him like a flash of light. He had seen her on the cover of a national business magazine less than 2 months earlier. The article had focused on one of the largest corporate partnerships in the country, a partnership involving billions of dollars in future expansion projects. Jason lowered his phone slowly. Suddenly, the entire evening looked very different. Meanwhile, Evelyn's confidence continued growing. She stepped onto a small platform near the center of the ballroom where guests could easily see her. "Tonight is about vision," she announced while raising a fresh glass of sparkling water. "The Kensington Group is entering the most exciting chapter in its history." Applause followed. Not enthusiastic, not strong, but enough to encourage her. "In just a few days," she continued, "our family will finalize a transformative agreement worth $2.4 billion. This time the applause grew louder. Several investors nodded approvingly. The contract had become one of the most anticipated business deals of the year. Reporters had written about it. Analysts had praised it. Competitors feared it. Evelyn smiled proudly, as if she personally controlled every detail. Across the room, Nia listened quietly. Her expression never changed. The city lights reflected softly in the glass behind her. Nearby guests began discussing the contract in excited voices. Some called it a game changer. Others described it as a guaranteed success. Nobody noticed that Nia already knew every page of the agreement. Nobody realized she understood exactly how fragile it truly was. Then Sarah noticed something else. Nia was not watching Evelyn. She was watching the ballroom entrance. Waiting. Calm. Patient. Certain. And for reasons Sarah could not explain, that unsettled her more than anything that had happened all evening. Jason Cooper could no longer keep the realization to himself. He moved through the crowd carefully, keeping his voice low as he approached Sarah Mitchell near the auction tables. "I know who she is," he said. Sarah followed his gaze across the ballroom. Nia Whitmore remained near the window, calm as ever, her stained gown now barely noticeable beneath the soft lighting. "Who?" Sarah asked. Jason hesitated for a second. Even saying the name out loud felt strange after everything they had witnessed. Nia Whitmore. Whitmore Strategic Holdings. Sarah's eyes widened. The name landed immediately. She knew it. Almost everyone in serious finance knew it. The company had become one of the most influential investment and infrastructure firms in North America. The kind of company that quietly shaped industries while avoiding headlines. Sarah looked back toward Nia. Suddenly the composure made sense. The silence made sense. Everything made sense. "You are sure?" she asked. Jason nodded. 100%. Sarah stared across the room. Then Evelyn just made a catastrophic mistake. Nearby guests began noticing their conversation. Curiosity spread. Questions followed. A few executives discreetly searched Nia's name on their phones. One by one, expressions changed. Surprise. Confusion. Concern. The ballroom was beginning to wake up. Across the room, Evelyn remained blissfully unaware. She continued greeting donors and investors, accepting congratulations about the upcoming agreement. Her confidence filled every conversation. "This deal changes everything," she told a group of business leaders. "It puts us years ahead of the competition." One investor smiled. "Charles must be thrilled." Evelyn laughed. "My brother has never been more confident." The statement drifted across the room just as another executive quietly pulled up a recent business article featuring Nia's photograph. Within minutes, several people were comparing the image to the woman standing near the window. The resemblance was undeniable. The atmosphere shifted again, this time more noticeably. Conversations that had focused on the contract now focused on Nia. Questions traveled from table to table. Why was she here? Had she been invited personally? Did Charles know she had arrived? Sarah noticed a senior board member from another corporation staring at Nia with growing concern. He looked less interested in the wine incident now and more interested in the implications. Because in business, reputation mattered. Relationships mattered. Respect mattered. And everyone in that ballroom understood that powerful people rarely forgot public humiliation. Nia continued watching the entrance. Her patience never wavered. She checked the time once and returned her attention to the doors. That simple action did not escape Sarah. "She is waiting for someone," Sarah said quietly. Jason nodded. "I think she is waiting for Charles." The possibilities settled heavily between them. Several guests who had begun connecting the dots now looked visibly uncomfortable. The evening no longer felt like a charity gala. It felt like the calm before a storm. Then one of the ballroom attendants hurried past carrying a tablet. Another staff member adjusted her earpiece and moved toward the entrance. Small movements. Easy to miss. Yet they signaled that something important was happening behind the scenes. Nia noticed them immediately. A faint smile appeared for the first time all evening. Not a smile of satisfaction. Not revenge. Recognition. As though events were unfolding exactly as expected. Sarah followed her gaze toward the ballroom doors. The tension returned instantly. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it now. Even the music seemed quieter. Even the laughter sounded forced. And while Evelyn Kensington continued celebrating a victory she believed was already hers, the witnesses around her were beginning to understand that the most important person in the room had never been standing beside the spotlight. She had been standing patiently in the shadows all along. The ballroom doors remained closed, yet anticipation spread through the room like electricity before a storm. Guests who had once been focused on auctions, speeches, and networking now found themselves watching Nia Whitmore. Some pretended not to. Others stared openly. The shift was impossible to ignore. Information traveled quickly among people whose careers depended on knowing important things before everyone else. Within minutes, more executives had quietly confirmed Jason Cooper's discovery. The woman standing near the window was not merely a successful entrepreneur. She was one of the most influential decision-makers in American business. And suddenly the contract everyone had spent months celebrating looked far less certain. Across the room, Evelyn Kensington remained completely unaware. She had gathered another circle of admirers around her table and was enjoying every second of the attention. "This agreement will reshape the industry," she declared confidently. $2.4 billion. The largest strategic partnership our family has ever secured. Several guests nodded. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. One investor cleared his throat before speaking carefully. "Who exactly signs the final authorization?" Evelyn laughed. "Trust me, everything is already handled." The answer sounded confident. It also sounded incomplete. The investor said nothing more. Nearby, Sarah Mitchell noticed a few board members checking their phones. One executive quietly stepped away from the conversation entirely. Another suddenly appeared far more interested in the dessert table than discussing the future of the Kensington Group. They all sensed the same thing. Something about this evening no longer felt predictable. Nia finally stepped away from the window and moved toward a quieter section of the ballroom. The crowd subtly parted as she passed. No one instructed them to move. They simply did. Respect often arrived long before introductions. Near a private hallway leading toward the executive suites, Nia paused beside a marble column and checked her phone. A single message had arrived. "Ready when you are." She read the words once before locking the screen. Her expression remained calm. The same calm that had frustrated Evelyn from the beginning. The same calm that now made several executives nervous. Years earlier, Nia had learned an important lesson during a failed negotiation in Chicago. Emotion created noise. Patience created leverage. While others rushed to react, she learned to wait. Most people revealed everything they needed to reveal if given enough time. Tonight was proving that lesson once again. Back in the ballroom, Evelyn raised her glass toward a group of investors. "By next quarter," she said proudly, "everyone in this room will wish they had bought more shares." A few people smiled. Fewer than before. The confidence that had once energized the room was beginning to feel misplaced. Then a familiar name surfaced in another conversation nearby. "Whitmore." Someone whispered it. Another person repeated it. The word moved through the crowd in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle slowly assembling themselves. Evelyn finally noticed the unusual atmosphere. The laughter seemed weaker. Conversation stopped when she approached. People who had eagerly gathered around her earlier now appeared distracted. She scanned the room, confused by the change. Her eyes eventually found Nia, standing quietly near the hallway entrance. For a brief moment, their gazes met. Nia said nothing. She did not need to, because somewhere beyond the ballroom, decisions were already being prepared. And while Evelyn still believed she was celebrating the biggest business victory of her family's career, the foundation beneath that victory had already begun to crack. Nia Whitmore quietly stepped through the private hallway and disappeared from the noise of the ballroom. The sounds of conversation and clinking glasses faded behind her as she entered a small executive lounge reserved for major sponsors. The room was empty. Soft lighting reflected across polished wood panels and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Nia placed her phone on a table and looked at the faint wine stain still visible on her gown. For a moment, she simply stood there. Not angry, not hurt, just thoughtful. She had attended enough events over the years to recognize the pattern. The assumptions changed costumes, but they rarely changed substance. Different city, different faces, same judgment. She remembered a conference in Dallas nearly 15 years earlier. A hotel employee had handed her a service entrance map because he assumed she worked for the catering company. The following morning, she had delivered the keynote speech that opened the entire event. The memory no longer upset her. It simply reminded her how often people confused appearance with authority. Her phone vibrated. Monica Reed was calling. Nia answered immediately. "I am available," Monica said. Her voice carried the calm efficiency that had made her indispensable for nearly a decade. "I have been monitoring everything." Nia walked toward the window. "Then you know what happened." "I do," Monica paused briefly. The video clips are already circulating among attendees. Nia nodded. That did not surprise her. In rooms filled with executives, information moved faster than headlines. Status? She asked. Monica responded without hesitation. The agreement remains unsigned. Final authorization is still pending. Nothing has been executed. Nia looked out across the city lights below. Thousands of windows glowed against the darkness. Millions of people moved through lives that would never intersect with this ballroom. Yet within the next hour, a decision made inside this building could alter the future of multiple corporations. Prepare the termination notice, Nia said. Silence followed. Not shock, not confusion, just confirmation. Monica understood exactly what those words meant. Immediately, she asked. Immediately. Nia's voice remained steady. No delays. No extensions. No reconsideration language. Monica typed something. Understood. The agreement had taken 18 months to negotiate. Hundreds of meetings. Thousands of pages. Teams of attorneys. Consultants. Analysts. Investors. All of it now balanced on a single decision. Yet Nia showed no hesitation. Business partnerships depended on trust. Trust depended on judgment. Tonight, judgment had been displayed publicly for everyone to see. There is one more thing, Monica said. Several board members have already contacted us after hearing reports from the gala. Nia allowed herself the smallest smile. I expected that. Would you like me to schedule a formal review? Yes. Nia turned away from the window. Tonight. Monica answered immediately. It will be ready. The call ended. Nia slipped the phone into her purse and took a slow breath. Back inside the ballroom, investors were still celebrating a future that no longer existed. Evelyn Kensington was still enjoying applause. Executives were still discussing projections and expansion plans. None of them knew that the foundation beneath their expectations had already shifted. The decision was made, not because of a spilled glass of wine, not because of wounded pride, because character revealed itself under pressure. And tonight, an entire room had witnessed exactly what kind of character the Kensington family had chosen to display. Nia straightened her gown, composed herself, and walked back toward the ballroom doors. On the other side, the evening was still pretending everything was normal. But that illusion was about to end. When Nia Whitmore stepped back into the ballroom, something had changed. The conversations were quieter. The smiles were less certain. People who had spent the evening celebrating now seemed distracted by questions they could not ignore. The doors at the far end of the room opened, and a ripple moved through the crowd. Charles Kensington had arrived. Tall, composed, and accustomed to commanding attention, he entered surrounded by senior advisors and executives. Normally, his appearance would have become the center of the evening. Tonight, it lasted only a few seconds. Because almost immediately, his eyes found Nia. The reaction was instant. His stride slowed. The confidence on his face disappeared. Several people noticed. Sarah Mitchell noticed. Jason Cooper noticed. Even investors standing across the ballroom noticed. Charles looked as though he had just seen a problem he never expected to encounter. Evelyn spotted her brother and smiled broadly. She moved toward him through the crowd. There you are, she said. Everyone has been asking about the agreement. Charles barely seemed to hear her. His attention remained fixed on Nia. When did she get here? He asked quietly. Evelyn laughed. Who? Charles turned toward her. Nia Whitmore. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed Evelyn's face. You know her? She asked. The question alone caused nearby conversations to stop. Charles stared at his sister for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to the faint stain still visible on Nia's gown. His expression darkened. What happened? He asked. Evelyn's confidence returned immediately. Nothing important. She caused a scene earlier. Charles looked back at Nia, then at the stain, then back at Evelyn. The silence between them grew uncomfortable. Evelyn, he said carefully, tell me exactly what happened. The room seemed to lean closer. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Nobody wanted to miss a word. Evelyn shrugged. It was an accident. Her answer arrived too quickly, too rehearsed, too convenient. Charles did not look convinced. Nearby executives exchanged worried glances. They understood something Evelyn still did not. Nia was not merely another guest. She was the final approval authority on the largest agreement their company had pursued in years. Charles slowly exhaled. Then he walked directly toward Nia. The crowd opened before him. Conversations died completely. By the time he reached her, The ballroom felt silent enough to hear footsteps across marble. Nia met his gaze calmly. "Good evening, Charles," she said. Charles looked genuinely troubled. "Nia." He glanced briefly toward the stain on her gown. "I was not aware you had arrived." "I noticed," Nia replied. Her voice remained perfectly even. No anger. No accusation. Somehow that made the moment feel heavier. Charles lowered his voice. "Can we speak privately?" Nia considered the request for a second. Then she shook her head gently. "There is nothing private about what happened tonight." The words landed like a stone in still water. Across the ballroom, Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. Around her, people were no longer looking at her with admiration. They were looking at her with concern. And in that moment, as Charles Kensington stood face to face with the woman his company needed most, the truth finally became impossible for everyone in the room to ignore. The agreement they had spent 18 months building was no longer a certainty. It was a question, and the answer was standing directly in front of them. No one spoke after Nia's answer. The ballroom stood perfectly still, frozen between expectation and consequence. Charles Kensington looked around the room and immediately understood what had happened. He saw the faces avoiding eye contact. He saw the executives pretending not to listen. He saw his sister standing several feet away, suddenly unsure of herself for the first time all evening. Most of all, he saw the stain on Nia's gown. A small detail, a devastating one, because everyone in the room knew it represented far more than spilled wine. Charles took a slow breath. "Nia, I would like the opportunity to address this properly." His voice carried none of the confidence he had displayed in interviews and shareholder meetings. Nia regarded him calmly. "It was addressed properly," she said. The moment it happened, the words landed heavily across the ballroom. Nearby investors shifted uneasily. Several board members lowered their eyes. Sarah Mitchell watched the exchange with complete silence. Jason Cooper stood beside her, unable to look away. Charles glanced toward Evelyn. "Tell me you apologized." Evelyn opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The answer was obvious. Charles closed his eyes briefly. The realization seemed to age him several years in a matter of seconds. Around them, phones began vibrating. One executive checked a message and immediately went pale. Another looked down at his screen and whispered something to a colleague. The ripple spread quickly. Nia's phone remained silent. She already knew what they were reading. Monica Reed had moved exactly as instructed. The termination notice had been delivered. Formal review procedures had been activated. The agreement was no longer pending approval. It was pending cancellation. Charles's phone vibrated next. He looked at the screen, then looked again. His expression changed immediately. The color drained from his face. Several people nearby noticed. Evelyn noticed too. "Charles?" she asked. He did not answer. Another message appeared. Then another. Legal counsel, senior advisors, board representatives, all arriving within seconds of one another. The room seemed to shrink around him. Finally, Evelyn stepped closer. "What is happening?" Charles slowly lowered the phone. His voice was barely above a whisper. "The agreement has been suspended." The words spread through the ballroom faster than any announcement. Conversations erupted instantly. Investors exchanged shocked looks. Executives reached for their phones. Advisors moved toward corners of the room, searching for privacy. The atmosphere transformed from celebration into crisis within moments. Evelyn stared at her brother. "Suspended." Charles nodded once. "Effective immediately." "That is impossible." "No," Charles replied quietly. "It is very possible." Across the ballroom, several guests were already discussing the financial implications. 18 months of negotiations. Hundreds of millions spent preparing infrastructure plans. Future expansion projections. Market expectations. All suddenly uncertain. Not because of competition. Not because of regulation. Because of a decision made in a crowded ballroom by someone who believed consequences only applied to other people. Evelyn turned toward Nia. For the first time all evening, there was no arrogance left in her expression. No performance. No audience. Only realization. Nia met her gaze without anger, without satisfaction, without triumph. She simply stood there as the consequences unfolded naturally around them. The room no longer needed an explanation. The room had witnessed everything. And as executives rushed to contain a disaster that was already spreading beyond the ballroom walls, one truth became impossible to ignore. The most expensive mistake of the evening had never been the contract. It had been the decision to disrespect the person who held the power to approve it. The ballroom never fully recovered. The energy that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by the uneasy silence that follows a truth nobody can undo. Executives stood in small groups reviewing messages. Investors spoke in hushed tones. Advisors moved quickly between conversations, searching for solutions that no longer existed. The celebration was over. Reality had arrived. Charles Kensington remained where he stood, phone still in his hand, watching months of planning unravel in real time. Across the room, Evelyn looked smaller than she had at any point that evening. The confidence that once carried her through every conversation had disappeared. For the first time, she understood that status could not shield someone from consequences. Several guests quietly left the ballroom. Others stayed, unable to look away from the final moments of a story they had witnessed from the beginning. Sarah Mitchell watched Nia carefully. What struck her most was not the cancellation of the agreement. It was Nia's composure. Most people would have celebrated. Most people would have delivered a speech. Most people would have made sure everyone knew exactly who had won. Nia did none of those things. She simply stood there with the same calm presence she had carried all evening. Jason Cooper noticed it too. "She never changed," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. "That is what makes this different." Nearby, Charles finally approached Nia one last time. His expression was sincere. "I am sorry," he said. "Not because of the agreement. Because this should never have happened." Nia studied him for a moment. "I believe you mean that." Charles lowered his head slightly. The acknowledgement seemed to matter. "I hope this is not how people remember tonight." Nia glanced around the ballroom. At the executives. At the investors. At the guests who had watched everything unfold. Then she looked back at him. "People rarely remember the contract," she said. "They remember the character." The words settled over the room like a final judgment. Nobody argued. Nobody disagreed. Because everyone knew she was right. Nia turned and began walking toward the exit. No security escorted her. No assistants surrounded her. No announcement followed her departure. Yet every eye in the ballroom followed her movement. The room seemed to part naturally as she crossed the floor. Sarah stepped aside. Jason stepped aside. Even people who had never spoken to her stepped aside. Respect had finally arrived. Not because of her title. Not because of her wealth. Because of how she carried herself when she had every reason not to. At the entrance, Nia paused briefly and looked back at the ballroom one final time. The city lights beyond the windows reflected against the polished floor. Conversations had stopped. Phones had lowered. The lesson had become impossible to ignore. She thought about the young woman she once was, standing outside that Manhattan gala years earlier, being told she did not belong. She thought about every boardroom, conference, and event where assumptions had spoken before facts. Then she smiled softly and continued toward the doors. Her voice was calm when she spoke her final words. "I did not raise my voice. I raised the standard." And with that, Nia Whitmore walked into the Manhattan night, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget the cost of mistaking dignity for weakness and respect for something that had to be earned through appearances alone.